Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live event talking about negotiation styles and emotions. A couple of topics that attracted a lot of attention, so happy that we have a nice audience with us, and also a warm welcome to the one that will be listening to the recording maybe a bit later. Maybe the timing was not fully convenient and then you decide to listen to the recording. So a warm welcome to all of you. I have with me Marta Coelho, and we'll ask her to introduce herself in a moment. But first of all, we want to find out a bit more about the audience that is with us. So maybe you can tell us from where you're connecting. Uh, Both Marta and I are multicultural, right? She's from Portugal, but working in the UK. I'm from Italy, working in Switzerland. So I'm sure that we may have a variety of people joining us. The first one is from Rome in Italy. And let's get to see who else is with us today. Another also important point, this is your LinkedIn life, right? Marta and I can talk about many topics, and we want to make sure that the workshop as much as possible meets your needs. So do not hesitate to ask the question that you want to know about negotiation styles and emotions, so that we can help you as much as possible, right? So hello, Carmen. Hello, Anna, actually. And glad that we have a good number of people from very different countries, even from Canada. So thank you for being there up early, Bruno, to be with us today. And we've already seen a number of different nationalities of people working with us. So let's get started with this. Well, many of you probably already know me, but my name is Giuseppe. I'm a teaching negotiation and influencing. I'm also the founder of CABL, a company that specializes in negotiation, influencing, and procurement training. But let's find out a bit more about our special guest. Marta, the floor is yours. Can you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Giuseppe, for your kind words. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with everyone in the audience. As Giuseppe said, my name is Marta Coelho, and I have extensive experience teaching negotiation courses, both at the BSc in London and Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. I've also advised companies, big companies such as Adidas, Bosch, Equinor, GIC, and even the United Nations. So I have a vast experience advising companies in negotiations as well.
Fantastic. Perfect. Thank you very much, Marta. And let me start with the first few questions, and then, we will pick up the question from the audience a bit later as they come along. But remember, you can always ask question in the chat that you find on the right side of the screen. So let's start with negotiation styles. I mean, which negotiation styles can one adopt in negotiations?
Oh, that's a good question, Giuseppe. Thank you for asking this. So I was thinking about, according to the globally recognized framework by Thomas and Kilman, there are 5 negotiation styles that one person can adopt in negotiations. And these negotiation styles depend on 2 dimensions, which are the assertiveness and the cooperativeness. The assertiveness is the extent to which the person tries to satisfy his own concerns in the negotiation. And cooperativeness is the extent to which the person tries to satisfy the concerns of the counterpart in the negotiation. So let's take an example of a buyer, for example, trying to negotiate payment conditions with a seller. So if the buyer adopts a competing approach in that negotiation, the buyer will probably say, well, I can only pay 50% front. Instead, if the buyer adopts an accommodating approach to that negotiation, you will say, let us make this work for you. What do you need? So we'll be concerned about the concerns of the seller and not about his own concerns. If the buyer takes a collaborative approach, he will say, I would prefer to pay 50% upfront, but what do you need? I need to know your preferences too. So he's concerned about satisfying his own concerns and the concerns of the seller. If the buyer is avoiding, is not even going to talk about payment conditions with the seller. And finally, if the buyer is compromising, what he will do, he will say, well, I prefer to pay 50% upfront. You prefer 70% upfront. Let's go for 60%. So let us find a middle ground solution. So these are the 5 negotiation styles, according to Thomas and Kilman. But I'd like to add 2 extra points to that question. So I would like to say that we have a default style when we negotiate, and it's really important to be aware of our default style because we may need to adapt it depending on the context and the person you're negotiating with. The other aspect that I would like to mention is we should include a strategy regarding negotiation styles in our preparation for the negotiation. Usually we will overlook that part in the preparation, but it's important to reflect about it when we prepare for the negotiation as well.
Okay, fantastic. So we had an overview of those 5 styles that again come from 2 dimensions, right? That in simple terms, you may think about how much I care about my own needs, how much I care about the relationship, and that's, as you put together those 2 dimensions, then you ended up having those 5 styles. But is there a best negotiation styles in your opinion, Marta?
That's a very relevant point, Giuseppe. I think that if you are an experienced negotiator, you'll be trying to use the cooperative style and adopting the associated friendly nonverbal communication, because this will make the other party feel more at ease with you and willing to share information with you. And that's very important because the more the other party likes you, there is evidence showing that the more they will trust you and the more they will be willing to share information with you. That's why experienced negotiators tend to try to be collaborative. However, having said that, I should say that all 5 styles can be very useful in negotiations, depending on the context. For example, if you adopt a hard approach to the negotiation, so if you are competing, it can be very helpful when unpopular courses of action need implementing, for example. So you may want to be competing in that case. You may want to be accommodating, so you may decide to adopt that soft approach to the negotiations if the issues are more important to the other party than they are to you, and you want to build credits for the future. Collaborating can be extremely useful, as I've already mentioned. And so you may decide to adopt that friendly approach to negotiations if the concerns of both parties are too important to be compromised, or when you are in a multi-party negotiation where collaboration can be very extremely useful. Avoiding, so you avoid engagement, it can also be very useful to adopt that negotiation style. For example, when you need to gather information, you may decide to avoid, or when you need to let people cool down, you may decide to avoid, or when the costs of conflict are higher than the benefits of the resolution, where avoiding can also be very helpful. And finally, compromising can be extremely helpful. So you go for middle ground solution to split the difference. It can be very helpful, for example, when expedient decisions and the time pressure are needed, or when you need to achieve temporary settlements to complex issues in negotiations. So all 5 styles can be very useful depending on the context and the person you are negotiating with.
Okay, perfect. So I guess, there are a couple of messages you want to retain. One is, Usually the cooperative style is the one which leads the best result, especially right if you want to create the right mood and encourage information sharing that help you to understand the interest and priority of the other party. And on the other side, what you're saying is that we need the flexibility, right? We need to be able to adapt our approach to different kind of contexts. So if I now talk, I know that I've seen in the list of people, a few people that work in procurement, right, in the participants, then you may also want to reflect in terms of the Craylick matrix and try to think about, what kind of negotiation am I? Am I in a strategic negotiation? Am I in a leverage category? And then, of course, depending on the kind of context where you are in the negotiation, you may decide to maybe to go for competing, or may decide to go for collaborating, or you may decide to go for harmonizing, avoiding, and those kind of things, right? So yes, the good negotiator is able to adapt the right style to the right context. By the way, Marta, allow me also to take a different dimension. You mentioned that we have a preferred collaboration style. Will this negotiation style, will the style change where we are cool or where we are under emotional pressure?
Yes, definitely. So if you are under emotional pressure, what usually happens is that you go back to your default style. So or actually you may become more competing and more emotional as well. So my answer is be aware of your default style, because when you're under pressure or facing somebody with a competing style, you may go back to your default style, because if you are not thinking, that's what happens. So and your default style may not be the most appropriate given the context. And the second answer is, usually if you're under pressure, it's likely that the emotions will escalate. So you will tend to mirror the emotion from the other side. And you have to be very careful about that, because if the other side is, for example, losing its temper, you don't want it to happen with you. So you have to go to the balcony and try to reset instead of react in terms of emotions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Now, we're going to go more in depth into the topic of emotions in a moment. Let me ask, I was giving a talk this weekend about my new book, and one of the questions that people ask me with reference to the current political environment and the attitude of a president that is negotiating with everyone, take it or leave it kind of approach, then if we apply this to negotiation style, if one faces a competing counterpart, which style will you suggest adopting?
That's a good point. So if I'm facing a competing counterpart, I would probably start by making some concessions to not let the other party lose face. But if the other party remains uncooperative, I would probably become more assertive and firm, not becoming overly confrontational in that situation. I'm now thinking, I once advised an international leading an organization, and I think was facing a very competing counterpart. And the biggest piece of advice I think I gave to that client was, don't feel intimidated by the situation. As I said before, try to stay calm and don't lose sight of your partner, because if you do that, simple tactics may work very well. So I also advise the client to prepare a list of questions to try to understand why the counterpart is being difficult and somehow aggressive, and to be prepared to show, genuine interest in their answers and their concerns. Another thing which I think is really important is to be prepared to apologize if necessary. However, in that case, I remember that there were countless of examples of where the client, despite the client showing interest and being prepared to apologize, the counterpart was still being aggressive and difficult. And in that case, I think it's important to show that you can play hardball if necessary, especially because that aggressive behavior cannot be tactical and not genuine. And so we really have to be careful. And so there is a point in which you may need to show that you can be difficult if necessary. And a final note, I was thinking about the financial institution that I also advised. And the lead negotiator from the other side was losing his temper, became extremely difficult. And I think the most important thing is to go to the balcony, to see, which is a metaphor for staying rational and objective. And I think it's really important to be able to go to the balcony in some occasions during the negotiations, because emotions can really escalate in negotiations, and it's important to reset instead of react on impulse when you're negotiating.
Okay. And I guess, let's recognize that, if the other guy is competing and you are too collaborative, more likely they are going to take advantage of you, at least on a one-off kind of situation, right? So over time things may change, but you have to be prepared also, to reciprocate if the other person doesn't seem to move to a more collaborative attitude after you made, some positive moves in the direction to help them save the face and those kind of things. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think, that's it can make us reflect also on some of the political dynamics of today. Now, one thing, I was talking before about my book. So just as you may be aware, I recently published a new book. It's called Negotiation plus Influence Equals Success.
Yeah,
So
it's here. It's here next to me.
yeah, fantastic. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And yeah, if you're thinking about a Christmas present for the people in your team and you want to give them some reading, that's maybe an opportunity. So let me put in the chat, right, the link to the book, because it's a very pragmatic book, right? It's not about deep theory. It's a 67 small chapter with a story, and then 3 concrete advice. How do I deal with team negotiation? How do I make a multiple equivalent simultaneous offer? How do I use framing or whatever, or even career related type of things that can help you to get some insight. By the way, let me also take one of the comments from the people in the audience. So yeah, and here we go. In my experience, choosing the best model, at least the current prevailing style, depends heavily on the industry we are in. Regardless of whether you like the style, it has to suit the industry. Thomas Kilmann matrix could have been used very well with industry. I'm very sure everyone will immediately know where FMG, the food industry, or automotive are located. Yeah. And yeah, indeed, there are certain industries that tend to be more competitive than others.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yes,
if you
that's why.
negotiate with retailers, for instance, then very often it's so difficult, right? To have a collaborative type of mindset, because that's not the default method that you're going to find from the counterpart.
Yeah, the context is really important, and as and researching about the person you're negotiating with is also very important about his or her negotiation style. So decisions are influenced by what has just been said. Yeah.
That's why, like Marta was saying at the beginning, once we do our preparation, you reflect on the whole situation, including, the kind of people you're negotiating with, and then you make a decision and say, okay, what kind of style am I going to approach in this negotiation? Take into account the industry, the company, and the people I'm interacting with.
Exactly.
Now, let's now look at the situation that we touched where the emotions escalate. So, or at least, there is a risk that the emotion escalate because you are confronted with a difficult counterpart or somebody who gets emotional or those kind of things. So would you suggest any strategies to control emotions during a negotiation?
Mm, that's a good question, Giuseppe. I should say that controlling emotions is considered by many negotiation experts as one of the most difficult tasks in negotiations. It's really important to have a strategy when you start feeling that you are getting emotional, because when emotions are high, our decision making tends to be poor. So we have to be very careful about our decision making when we are getting emotional. So now I should say that the strategies to control emotions can really vary. They're not universal. But it's important that each of us has our own strategy to deal with the emotions. So I would say, for example, in my case, when I start getting feeling the emotions kicking in, I tend to take notes and related notes or scribble or do some drawings. And this allows me to reset in a very effective way. Other people use a tactical breathing. Hostage negotiators use it a lot. It doesn't work very well with me, but many people say it really works with them. I've heard about people saying, I find this very interesting, scratching up the toes as a way of relaxing. So moving the toes can really help them to reset. Others focus on a word such as peace or calm, or words that bring them some control over the emotions. Other people are even able to meditate during the negotiations. So basically, what I'm trying to say is we have to think about the strategy that works for us and practice it, because it's really, really important to be able to do that during negotiations when emotions escalate.
Yeah. And maybe a couple of tactics that many people use, for instance, taking a break, right?
Yeah,
When you realize that the
yeah,
context is not positive, then you say, well, maybe rather than trying to manage this right like this, let's maybe take a 10 minutes break, and then we reconvene and we try to rediscuss this topic again when we had the opportunity to relax a bit.
yeah. That's
That's
exactly. Yeah.
maybe now another one that it's been a classic, right? From the book Get Into Yes, is count up to 10 before you
Mhm.
reply. Now I have my own version of this one, which
Mm.
is counting from 1000 backwards in steps of 7.
Wow.
So 1000, 193, 186, 179, 172, etc. Um, what do I mean with this? Is that if you go back to the theory of Kahneman, system 1 and system 2, the rational and the emotional, the fast and the slow way of thinking, by doing those difficult calculation of counting downward in 7, you're activating the rational part of the brain and you reduce the pressure on the emotional side.
Interesting. Do you use it often, Giuseppe?
I use well when the discussion gets emotional,
Okay.
right? It doesn't happen very often. This year, I can think of one situation where the
Okay.
negotiation was really not productive, and then I had to use it in order to put myself under control. By
Good.
the way, we have in the audience also a leading expert on the field of emotions, Branka Zai. Hello, Branka. So, Branka, let's see the comment from Branka. There are two types of emotions: high arousal emotions, anger, fear, but disappointment and sadness are lower arousal emotion. You seem to consider only high arousal emotion. Yeah, I think you have a point there, right, Branka, that we are talking more about dealing with anger as opposed to dealing with people that are low into their sad, etc. And probably, one of the reasons behind this, Branca, is that in negotiation usually is more stressful for people to deal with people that are angry as opposed to deal with people that are sad. So, this may be a more common challenge for in negotiation, especially when you're dealing with conflict, right? When you are dealing with conflict, then is more likely to be confronted with high arousal emotions rather than low arousal emotions. But
Yes, but I think that if I feel sad during the negotiation myself or disappointed, I think the strategies to control my emotions, I would say it will still be the same. So I would try to distance myself by doing this drawing and taking these notes. And probably I would think about positive things in order to, to control by my low arousal emotions as well. So I would probably use the same tactics in that situation. Even though usually, so it's important not to show. So the message is not to show the emotions and to try to control my emotions. So of course, sometimes you need to show. Of course, sometimes I'm not saying that if you are sad or disappointed, it's important to show it. But I think it's what we need to do is, I think it's important we are conscious about what we are doing, not losing control with emotions. So we be conscious about what you are trying to show to the counterpart. Because sometimes it's strategic it's important to show and strategic to show the sadness in order to get some concessions from the other side. So being controlled in what you are trying to show to the counterpart.
Right. The emotions, right, is a fine balance, because if you are carried away and you are too much into the emotion, like Marta was saying before, then your decision-making ability drops. You're going to end up being less effective.
Yeah.
And on the other side, if you do not disclose emotion, if you do not show any emotion at all, then people are going to struggle to trust you, right? Your credibility will be low. Then I'm going to not feel very comfortable with somebody that doesn't show emotions at all. So how do I display a moderate level of emotion without getting carried away? And that's also where also the experience comes, and where practicing those skills can also help you to avoid that you get carried away by your emotions.
Exactly.
And let's see, because Branca is still, in fact, showing the right degree of emotion give the impression of sincerity. Yeah.
Yes, sometimes
Absolutely.
that's what I was saying. Yeah, of course, sometimes thank you for your comments, Branca. I think you're very right. So sometimes it's important to show some emotions, but as I said, you have to be control the emotions. So you have to be careful about what you are trying to show, and without, so it's not about losing control in terms of emotions. You have to show controlled emotions. So in the sense that your decisions must be strategic, without sounding very strategic. You know what I'm saying? I think it's important to be careful. Sometimes you want to show them, but be conscious and rational about what you are trying to show.
Okay. We have another comment from Andre, by the way. There is a third type, feigned emotions. This can be used very deliberately as a negotiation strategy to control and confuse the negotiation partner. But you have to be very, very careful not to squander your trust.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Andre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the trust is an element. Now the question is what kind of negotiation you're in. If you are in a long-term relationship, it's probably a dangerous strategy. If you are in a one-off type of transaction and you want to buy a carpet at the bazaar, then it's a different kind of approach, and you may be more comfortable with using those type of tactics. Now, if I may, Marta, before we close, our time is running. What final piece of advice would you give our audience regarding emotions in negotiation?
So I regarding that question, I think I have 3 points that I'd like to add, which touch some of the comments made before. So the first aspect that I would like to mention is that we should be very aware that we express our emotions through body language and voice. So our facial expressions, the gestures, and the posture, as well as the voice, tell a lot about what's going on inside us. So you should stay tuned to the emotions that we display, the emotions and body language that we display, and the ones displayed by others. So that's something we should listen to the answers, but also pay attention to the body language because and voice, because they can tell a lot about what's going on. The second aspect is, and I'm going back to what Branka mentioned, is that emotions can be strategically leveraged in negotiations. So, for example, if you want your counterpart to be cooperative, you may decide to use some emotions, such as hope, interest, or curiosity, because those emotions encourage cooperative strategies from the other side. They encourage information exchange and creativity. So you may want to show those emotions in order to trigger cooperative strategies. On the other hand, if you want to take a more competitive stance on a specific issue, you may decide to display fewer emotions, because more neutral expressions can convey confidence and control. So emotions can be leveraged, and we should be careful about thinking which emotions are more helpful to display in specific situations. And the last point, which we have also touched before, is that we should research about our counterparts' negotiation style and emotions, because the better we know the counterpart, the more effectively we'll be able to read the signs given by them in the negotiation, and it will also help us to make more informed decisions about our emotional display. So include in your research research about the other person's negotiation style, and because it will help you a lot in your preparation for the negotiations.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much. We said it was the last comment, but at the same time, I see that there are a few more questions. So maybe, let's quickly, I know that we are running out of time, but let's quickly give some feedback to the people that put a comment, and then we go. It's our responsibility to manage the emotion of our counterpart. I can give the first piece, Marta, and then maybe you can add.
Yes, please.
Yes, I think, it is. And if indeed, you're confronted with genuine anger, not somebody that is playing a tactic, right? Somebody that is pretending to be angry. But if you are dealing with people that are displaying strong, high arousal type of emotions, then what you can do is help them to manage their emotion, to regain their control by listening, by acknowledging what they're experiencing, maybe apologizing if there is something that you actually did wrong, so that you help them somehow. When they feel helped, listened, and understood, they're more likely to regain their calm, right?
Yes, and of course, I mean, sometimes you're helpless. So sometimes whatever you do, you're not able to control the other person's emotions, especially if the other person becomes angry. So that in that case, sometimes you have to think about strategies, as Giuseppe mentioned before. Sometimes it's important to bring, to have a break, or in some situations you have to bring somebody else to negotiate on your behalf because the situation becomes out of control, and so there's nothing more you can do, and so it may be helpful to bring somebody else to negotiate with you on your behalf.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's quickly take another comment from Andrea. Showing emotion also depending if you're having a face-to-face negotiation or online meeting, right? So we say, of course, the less of rich communication mean you have, then the fewer the channel of information that are available. Marta was talking about body language and voice communicating something, so you have more opportunity to read on a face-to-face, a bit less in a video conference, a bit less on the phone, and substantially less on email, right? So yeah, that's a fact. Thank
Yes, I
you.
think it's, so controlling the voice and the pace as well, if you're, using silences and etc. can also be very helpful in those situations. It's not only the voice, it's the tone, the volume, it's the volume, it's the pace and the pitch can also be very useful in those situations.
Fantastic. And you have Branca here, which by the way is also, she's leading a company on voice, on the use of voice, Vox Institute. And indeed, emotional display can be used strategically in terms of emotional contagion. They spread like an airborne viruses, right? So maybe let me conclude with this idea of we can spread negative emotion, but we can also spread positive emotion. Recognizing that emotions are contagious, let's remember this idea from Branca and what Marta mentioned before. If I want to create a collaborative kind of spirit, then I can strategically use to display positive emotion like hope, like interest, like curiosity, so that you're more likely to orientate the negotiation towards a more collaborative tone. Marta, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. Thank you to our audience that brought great insight and valuable idea, and look forward to reconnecting with you at our next event that will be after the summer break. Right? We don't do a workshop in December because most of the people are too busy with Christmas time. So thanks again, Marta, and looking forward to reconnect with you with our series of events in January.
Great.
All the very best wishes to you all. And think if you have a Christmas present, you have no idea for the Christmas present, maybe there is a book that you can offer to your team that can give pragmatic strategy to deal with negotiation and influencing challenges.
Thank you very much.
Again. All the best and have a great time. Thank you.